I want to thank everybody who's joined so far. We'll give people a few more moments and then we'll get started. All right, I think we should get started, and I'm sure other people will join us as we go along. And I know I just want people to know that today we're simulcasting this, so it's here on Zoom, but also on YouTube. And also we'll have links available afterwards if you want to share with other people to view. But I just want to thank everyone for joining us today for a kickoff Children's Week conversation. Protecting our students. So I'm Bruce Leslie. I'm the president of First Focus on Children, and I'm pleased to be joined today by Florida State Representative Anna Eskamani and Pan American's Jonathan Friedman for today's discussion. Before we dive into today's webinar and discussion, I want to invite everyone to visit our website, firstfocus.org/Children's Week, to view a full list of the activities and other ways you can participate in Children's Week here in nationally. And throughout the week, First Focus on Children and community partners will be hosting a mixture of virtual conversations and in-person events on a range of topics. We will be posting online. Invite you to join the conversation using the hashtag Children's Week 2023. Today, we will be discussing the recent wave of state and local policies related to our public schools and the impact some of these proposals have on our students. While book bans, anti-LGBTQ policies, challenges to teaching history and social-emotional learning, child privacy violations, conflicts with school boards, and other policies may all seem like separate issues. When we take a whole child approach, we can see how these policies are interconnected. And even more importantly, we can see the consequences they hold for children. We hope that today's conversation will help show the overarching issues and provide steps so that we can all take to address these issues and better support our children. It is a privilege for me to be joined today by two of the leading experts on these issues who are doing hand-to-hand combat basically on some of these issues. Florida State Rep. Anna Eskamani and Jonathan Friedman, Director of Free Expression and Education Programs at Penn, to share their insights on what needs to be done to protect our students. Thank you both so much for being here with us today. My first question I just wanted to ask you both is sort of just a general question about how you got here, and even you can tell us a little bit about what's going on even today. And so this, one of the things that we find is that children are often an afterthought, particularly among policymakers in this country. So, for Anna, I would love for you to talk about what is it in your background and what is it that makes you really go out of your way to really be a champion for children. And same with you, Jonathan. Like, I know that you have a background in international work, but here you are working on domestic issues and doing amazing, awesome things for kids as well. So would love to hear sort of, how you guys came to kids issues and what makes you both awesome champions for children.
For sure. Well, thanks so much, Bruce, for the invitation. It's great to be here with Jonathan as well. And again, my name is Anna Eskamani. I'm proud to serve District 42 in the Florida State House Legislature, which encompasses parts of Orange County, including the cities of Orlando, Winter Park, Belle Isle, Edgewood, Maitland, and the historic town of Eatonville. It's a very diverse district that I am proud to serve and have been serving since 2018. To get to the heart of your question, I grew up in Central Florida as the daughter of working class immigrants. And one reason why I care so deeply about children's issues is because when I was a kid, my mom passed away, and I was just 13 years old, and she was diagnosed with cancer when I was about 9. So I was one of her main caregivers during that time, and I just reflect on just the weight of that and how I really couldn't be a kid because of just these really grown up things happening around me, where I had to be my mom's caregiver. I had to be the big sister to my twin sister. I had to be the support system to my older brother, and of course to my dad. And I look back at those experiences and who are the individuals that were there for me beyond my family? Who was the chosen family? Who were the folks that really became my rock? And I think about my teachers, the teachers who came to my mom's memorial service, the ones that checked in on me to make sure that I was going to be okay. My theater director that gave me an outlet as a thespian through my high school years, and of course all the educators that wrote me letters of recommendation, that supported me in my application to college, where I'm now getting my PhD in public administration at the University of Central Florida, while of course having worked in nonprofits over a decade and being the first ever Iranian American elected any public office in Florida. So when I look back at my own childhood, I realized pretty quickly just how important it is for kids to be supported. Every kid is born, as a clean slate, if you will, and yet because of our broken safety nets, because of our political climate, because of economic disparities, because of geographical barriers and language barriers and lack of infrastructure for people with disabilities, we see that not every kid gets an equal chance to succeed. And that has huge ramifications for generations to come. If we can help ensure that this generation is going to be healthy, happy, and strong, then all of us will succeed together. So I think for me, it's a foundational understanding of what it's like to grow up with no money, what it's like to struggle financially, to also go through a sick parent, and what it's like to lose the parent. And those are some of the motivating factors of my own lived experiences that push me to run for office in the first place, and to really center on issues that impact our families, that impact our children. And in the context of public education, academic freedom, to also want to create an environment where people can be themselves, they can learn about unique and diverse perspectives, and that they're supported and safe in doing that versus the climate we see today.
Yeah.
That that you spoke to it so well, Anna. That is the power of public education, and that's always really what's attracted to me to being a someone who stands on the side of a robust public education in a democratic society. I mean, it is critical to provide young people opportunities to learn, because you see that spark happen with young people when they learn about a historical event and learn something new about it, a detail, a way to solve a math problem, a scientific problem that sparks their interest, and they get inspired to go work in that field. And it really is schools, more so than really any other institution, are places that we entrust children, we entrust young people, we expect them to uphold certain common civic virtues and really just be these potentially wonderful places. And they're places of common socialization where people can come together across difference, can and should and must be able to disagree, be able to explore different ideas, be able to play devil's advocate, to look at a problem from multiple sides. I fear very much the ways in which all of that we traditionally associate with a strong, robust education is being undermined right now. And so, it is true, too often children are an afterthought, but what it is that we provide children is going to make such a difference to, the teenagers that they're going to be able to become, the college, the college students that they're going to be after that, and then the upcoming workforce. And so, we're talking about a situation right now where, for the first time, I think really in probably half a century, in American schools, we are talking about, students and families who feel in many ways free to express themselves, open about who they are, wanting to explore new narratives of American history, wanting to see new stories that maybe hadn't been told before, new books. And in response to that, now we're living through just this incredible, breathtaking effort at suppressing that, at kind of, pushing that away, at silencing that freedom, that liberty, that expression, that openness, that dialogue, that diversity. And And we know that the potential of learning in schools, the potential for an impactful, inspiring education is somewhat limitless. And so it's really critical that more and more people stand up on the side of public education. It doesn't mean you have to agree with every lesson or every book or the way that everything is structured in schools. It means that at the end of the day, you are willing to stand behind the idea of public education, the idea of professional expertise among teachers and librarians, and recognize that there are ways in which we can solve these problems, and there are ways in which it makes no sense to try to solve them because you're just going to run roughshod over the institution.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And I love that you both have in your opening kind of said really centered kids in this conversation. It's unbelievable to me sometimes when we talk about something like education, which is a children's issue, right? And yet oftentimes people really center it on the conversation on what do the adults think, and certainly those that matters in a big way, but the kids are often sort of an afterthought. Jonathan, like, I would love to hear your, like, what brought you to being such an awesome advocate on kids' issues too?
Well, I had originally always planned on being a teacher. That was the first dream. Before I wanted to, after that, I pursued a PhD and worked on the idea of improving academic teaching in universities. And from there, I've kind of transitioned into this role, being a human rights advocate for the power of public education. And I work across K-12 and academic freedom issues in higher education. But really, it stems from my own, I would say, interest in the power of learning, the power of reading, the power of questioning. I think I've always been very hungry and been somewhat interested in many areas of information myself. So, I see the power of a good book to really change the way you think about the world.
No, that's awesome. So Representative Eskamani and Jonathan, I would love for you guys to kind of give the audience a little bit of a what's happening right now, and particularly for you, Representative Eskamani. I mean, you're at ground zero, and so what's happening right now in Florida, and what are some of the things you're seeing, and also, like, in addition to the negative, like, what I do think we're beginning to make a lot of progress, and so what are your thoughts on that, and how are we succeeding in sort of to the pushback on some of the attacks on schools with respect to things like book banning and anti-LGBTQ and all the stuff that's going on? So
yeah, absolutely. Well, I just want to echo one of the points that Jonathan made too, around public education being that equalizer. And I think that's why public education has always been a priority for me, because it does have the power to change lives. We see it every single day. I'm a living example of that. But only if you allow it to, right? Only if you create environments where our kids can have exposure, different experiences and identities. And it's very empowering to pick up a book and be able to relate to the lead character, right? One of the books that really impacted my life in a transformational way was a chapter book I found in the 99-cent bargain bin at my 8th grade book fair. And this was a book that is called Girl Hearts, and the main character loses her mom. And this was a time where my mom was getting very sick, and just the ability for me to read that story, was very charismatic. It prepared me to look at the reality of losing a parent, and it helped me grieve. It helped me go through that experience. And so books are just so life-changing, and also, of course, help you be more critical thinkers and independent, and being able to process information quickly thanks to literature is also just an important skill for any adult to have. So with that said, coming to ground zero here in Florida, things are pretty tough. We have a legislature that has basically created a facade, right? Like, this is a legislature that says that they want to protect academic freedom. They want to protect, I should say, freedom of speech, and they want to respect, parents' rights. And yet the policies that we see not only erode academic freedom and freedom of speech, but also ignore the voices of the majority of parents. We have a situation in Central Florida in Seminole County where, because one mom complained, the school board is allowing for a small section of their high school yearbook that talks about LGBTQ plus students to be removed because of one parent, right? Compared to the majority in the school who don't care. And if anything, think it's important to for high school students to identify themselves in their yearbook. But that's the status of where we are. The legislature has created a book banning process where one individual can hold up an entire school, let alone entire school district's access to that literature. And on top of all of that, you have a lot of disinformation coming from those in the state to use other types of communication tactics and fear tactics to just confuse voters and, of course, conflate different types of issues with literature. They're conflating what is a sexual health education curriculum with the books you find in your library. They're not the same, right? And it's also important to stress that sexual health education in Florida is not only pretty modest, just in its holistic iteration, but also requires parental consent. Parents can opt a kid out of any sex ed program. So there's just been this huge conflation between sexual activity and sexual orientation and gender identity, which again has been used to stoke fear, to spread homophobia, transphobia, and empower a small minority of people to not only endanger other students and their health and well-being, but to completely erase history, erase identities. And the sad part about the fight in Florida is that it doesn't stop at K-12. It has also gone into higher education with House Bill 999, Senate Bill 266, which is legislation that will insert partisanship into general education classes, ban all DEI programs, alongside many other efforts to suppress academic freedom in the collegial environment. Now, to the question of, things to be optimistic about, I agree with you. It's always important to talk about, what gives us hope. But I will say that more and more Floridians have been speaking out against these proposals. That example I mentioned of the Seminole County yearbook at Lyman High School. There was a school board meeting last week that was packed with parents and students and community members voicing support for LGBTQ plus students and opposition to removing pages from a yearbook. We see the same type of pushback, during committee meetings with community members and Floridians coming out to express support for freedom of speech, academic freedom, for history being taught accurately versus some of the whitewashing we're seeing today. And so organizations have formed as a result, including the Florida Freedom to Read Project, based out of Orlando, that is not only combating this rhetoric, but also providing book fairs for families and teachers to access books that are being restricted. Last point I'll make too is, lawmakers play a big role in this, even though I'm in the minority. I have the bully pulpit. I also have direct access to different state agencies. So this morning I sent an email to Florida Department of Education as they had a rulemaking meeting last week where, of course, by coincidence, I suppose, the video link did not work, despite the fact that, many family members and educators and concerned citizens wanted to watch this Board of Education meeting. They could not. And so I emailed the department and asked for a link for the recording, as all these meetings are supposed to be publicly accessible. So, we're also doing what we can to hold the line and kind of amplify, access to this information so that we can also make informed decisions about governments and about who represents us.
No, thank you. Jonathan, what about you? What are you seeing? Like, you guys have your finger on the pulse of, all these things that are going on across the country. And so what's your latest analysis and is there good news on the horizon?
Well, I don't know if it's good news. What I'll say is this, we are living through a monumental moment. And I think what's most shocking to me as somebody who has essentially been living and breathing stories of educational censorship for almost 2 years now from across the country. There's definitely been that kind of increasing share of the pie that comes from Florida, unquestionable. But it's really, this is a playbook. This is the same just about everywhere. I was reading today a story from South Carolina that involves students complaining about a lesson in an AP class where they were supposed to be taught a Ta-Nehisi essay, and said it, made them uncomfortable. And it looks remarkably like something that happened in Oklahoma, and it looks kind of like something that happened recently in Florida with the investigation of a teacher over showing a Disney movie, which is a student has a vague sense of a complaint, and suddenly that seems to trickle up and become a kind of actionable item for a school district, a school board, a legal apparatus. And, the answer to all of this is not that we can't have disagreements and have conversations and discuss, how we run schools in our society, but it's that the channels for that are essentially being overrun by whatever, a kind of like open season on complaints. So you have situations where there's no light between what might actually be a reasonable complaint or discussion that is to be had about a topic, a lesson, etc., compared to a group of people who are actually trying to stop everybody else from learning about certain content. And time and again, you see these sort of moments where somebody might be able to compromise, say, okay, we're going to allow you to opt your kid out of that lesson, or maybe you will make a separate lesson if you really don't feel like you should be able to you don't want your kid to learn this content. And I think there's a whole question about that from a children's and students' rights perspective, which is philosophically interesting and open to debate and discuss it itself. But even there, what we see is that is not of interest to those people who are pushing this. They do not want the compromise. So you see in Tennessee a story where a teacher, as part of a law that was passed 2 years ago there, alerted the community, the parents and students in the class, that she was going to be teaching, I think this was a librarian, she was going to be teaching a class for Mother's Day about books that don't have traditional mothers in the text. Now, one of the books involves mention of a family with two dads, but there are many kids who do not have traditional mothers in that sense. Maybe maybe it's a family that's been adopted, a step family, right? Someone lost their mother. I mean, Anna, you're talking about a situation like that. Those books could have meaning to you. And what's happening is, in that moment, in response to an alert that there's these books are going to be taught in a class, someone goes online and organizes a whole group of people to kind of funnel their outrage at a superintendent who looks at the course content of that lesson plan and then tells the teacher, what, don't teach this. And we see that in Wisconsin, where a teacher was organizing a student concert to sing a Miley Cyrus and Dolly Parton song, Rainbow Land. And then they told the teacher, the kids cannot sing the song. Now, that song, it references rainbows. Rainbows have this association with LGBTQ identities. There's nothing sexual in that song or, age inappropriate for first graders. It would be quite surprising for a teacher to think that there was, but that's not what's happened here. And so now that teacher, in response to her sharing what had happened publicly, she was suspended, and now she's in danger of being permanently terminated over something as simple as that. And so we're talking about songs and concerts and Disney movies in class and textbooks and then books on shelves. So it's this whole gamut of things that just didn't used to be so hard to do in schools, where a group of people have been empowered to make, basically foment outrage over these things. And in each case, you could imagine alternative solutions. You can imagine a parent who doesn't want something approaching a teacher and having a one-on-one conversation. It doesn't have to turn into an effort to get people fired or to get superintendents to cancel things. You don't have to ban books. You don't have to, issue gag orders on what it is that people can talk about in schools. And what's happening as a result of that climate is everyone is stepping back from anything even remotely controversial. So everyone is increasingly aware and doubting what it is that they can talk about with students. Students ask a question and a teacher feels that the answer might get them in trouble. They're just not going to answer it. Maybe they used to teach about civil rights. Now, this is a true story. Someone told me they used to take kids to the Civil Rights Museum in Tennessee. Now that field trip doesn't happen anymore. Instead, they take the kids to a baseball game because, it's not controversial. let's say. And that sounds shocking, doesn't it? That's a real story. And that's the kind of choice and kind of story that's happening all over the country. And so when you see that, when you think about the level on which that's happening all over the country, all over Florida, all over many states now, you really have to wonder about students and what is the quality of education that they're going to be getting, because this isn't about, so much of the media right now, a book, if it's a book people know, if it's, Mouse or The Handmaid's Tale or The Bluest Eye, it's a book people read, it's a book they know, they're getting upset about it. If it's a book they don't know, honestly, it doesn't make as much news. But none of this is about any one book in any one school district. This is about that chilling climate. And that chilling climate is extending far beyond the school districts where particular books have been an issue. It is now at this point impacting really just about every school in the country.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, last week also, I think we saw that there was a pretty serious confrontation in Glendale in California at a school board meeting. And one of the groups who is a national group pushing the book bans and all the stuff that we're saying started in Florida, tweeted something to the effect of that confronting people and even fighting is an acceptable thing. And it just struck me that kids are seem to me to be way ahead of all of us, all the adults in this, and that in that case it was a question around Pride Month. And knowing my kids and other people, I would think that 98% of kids are like totally on board, happy with it. They're there to support their fellow students. And then it's kind of this crazy thing where it's the adults that are acting poorly and incentivizing, violence and fighting. And again, it's sort of the afterthought, right? This is not what kids want. This is not what kids need. So what are some of the things you both might recommend? Like, what I do see that like kids are standing up for themselves too, and then also we're beginning to see really the parents who, vast majority of parents do oppose book bans. There's polling that shows that less than 20% of Americans support these movements. So what are the things the roles that parents, teachers, but students themselves can play in really kind of pushing back on this? We're seeing students successfully getting books put back into the libraries and stuff like that. So just curious, what are your all's thoughts, and what things are you seeing happening?
Well, there definitely has been a grassroots effort, and of course, support of national partners like Pen America and others who are providing the data to help, right? Because I think it's so important for people to understand the magnitude of this. And something that the far right has been very good at is, of course, deflection, distraction, and also disinformation. We've had our governor, Ron DeSantis, now running for president, call book banning a hoax. Meanwhile, we actively see books being removed from schools. I mean, it's shocking to me, but that's why you need the receipts, you need the records, and organizations like Pen America help us with that. I referenced y'all's resources and links all the time, and share with concerned parents who are asking me, how many books have been restricted, what are they, and to give them the information to then take action, because knowledge is power, which is why they're trying to eliminate this literature and go after even math textbooks. I mean, that's what, this really has no bounds. Like here in the state of Florida, we have math textbooks that are being deemed too woke because they talk about an example of racial dynamics in a statistical question, right? Which is so important for us to understand health disparities and other types of issues that intersect with community demographics. That is now apparently inappropriate, for a classroom setting. So providing, I think, families with the facts, sharing it in a very easy to digest and shareable content is really important. And then, of course, showing up at your school board meeting, showing up in the legislature, staying engaged, being active. All of that is very, very important, because we do find ourselves in a situation where the loudest people are getting the most attention, and the contrast is there but we have to be vocal. And I'll add too, to mimic something Jonathan said, like, I feel like things are going to get worse before they get better, at least in Florida. We are seeing some of these extremist organizations organize trainings in Florida. Of course, the hostile takeover of New College, which is one of our state universities, to mimic Hillsdale, which is a private Christian college. That is purely designed to try to build a pipeline of more hyper conservative, censoring individuals, who again, want to create an environment where only their speech is the appropriate speech. And I'm reminded of some points that we made on the House floor in the context of the attacks on academic freedom and higher education, right? This notion of if you care about academic freedom, then you should create environments where all perspectives are heard, not cancel the perspectives you don't like. Like that does not support any type of freedom of speech. So I'm happy to have a conversation with anyone about what they might feel like is a censorship that maybe they feel like they're experiencing. Let's have that conversation. But censoring someone else's speech because you feel like yours is being censored is not how we operate at all. We should be encouraging everyone's freedom of speech, while also understanding separation of church and state. Like, this is the other dynamic that really kills me in the context of public education. Like, we're supposed to have separation of church and state. Public education is supposed to be an environment where students, regardless of their religious affiliation, all feel seen, supported, and are welcome. And we embrace that diversity. And so I'm also very concerned about just the privatization of public education and the shifting of public dollars towards private schools that have really no accountability in a state like Florida, but also, of course, unfortunately have histories of discriminating against students who have disabilities, against students who identify as LGBTQ+. So that's a separate, but I would argue very relevant issue we have in our state where, we're siphoning away public money towards private, sometimes for-profit, religiously based schools that also create environments of censorship under the tab of public taxpayer dollars.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'll just say, there is, I think some of the most powerful testimony has come from student voices in these cases, when high school students get together and organize and are able to show that many students want to read a book. I think it was in Central York, Pennsylvania, where the students came out and they said to the school district removing one of these books, like, don't you trust us to read this book? We're 17, we're 18, we can read this book, we can encounter this content, we're going to encounter it in the real world. Some of us already are. And I think that's this false notion that if we somehow like remove a book, like Jodi Picoult's 19 Minutes was removed somewhere in Florida because committee members said they didn't like that it deals with a school shooting. That's part of it in the book. And, it's just preposterous to me, the idea that you would remove a tool for people to understand, engage in a debate, learn about it, reflect upon it, an artistic kind of reflection of society. If getting rid of the book is not going to get rid of the problem, right? If anything, the book helps us to understand and tackle the problem. And if you're uncomfortable with that content and that topic, I think it's a gateway for you to get more active on that issue. And so I think the most important thing that people can do, though, right now really is, as Anna said, like, get involved in your communities. School boards are hyper local affairs. They are meant to reflect their communities. And it's unquestionable that this is being pushed by a very vocal minority, when you see that in the majority of cases it's one individual who's challenging an outsized number of books that they couldn't possibly have read 200 books themselves in the past month and filled out all these challenge forms for these books. The objections that they're making about the books are relatively thin. The objections about the laws that are being broken are being, the laws themselves are vague, the objections are vague. I think it's really critical that people who have a clear eye about what it is that schools are supposed to do are able to stand up for them. And that's, superintendents, that's school board members, that's parents as well, getting involved. And right now supporting those professionals who feel that they cannot speak out, the teachers and librarians, because everything that I'm hearing is that especially in Florida, people are going to be leaving these professions. And I think that was going to be a really difficult, group of experts to replace. Like we're talking about just a whole generation of teachers lost because of, these culture war issues and because of this effort to censor them and frighten them. And it might actually work, right? You might actually intimidate people into other lines of work. Well, that's going to be a crisis for public education in Florida, on the horizon, and could very well be in other states. But I would say what people need to do is realize that, also you might not personally like a book. You may not personally feel like a topic should be taught at a certain age. You're allowed to have those sentiments. Absolutely. That's an opportunity for you to engage with the community on this. And I'd say, one of the most disappointing aspects of the current wave of legislation that's been pushed around the country. I mean, first of all, just the fact that we have to realize we have never before seen so many bills pushed in so many states that seek to censor schools, universities, colleges, public libraries, teachers, librarians, right? Like these are knowledge professionals. These are people who are supposed to be trusted people in their communities, and they're being targeted with laws that are going to intimidate or criminalize their profession, their day-to-day work. And so what we need to do here, what we can realize is that none of these laws were written in any consultation with any of these groups. If the goal was to improve education, improve retention, improve literacy, improve young people, improve higher education, whatever it is, I am sure that most leaders in any of these sectors would be willing to sit down with any government when it comes to talking about public funds, efficiencies, effectiveness in pedagogy. But that's not what any of this is about. This is an effort to extend ideological control over schools that echoes the worst efforts that we saw, that we've seen tried in authoritarian countries. When you look for a parallel to the laws in Florida, you find Hungary, you find Russia, you find, scratch a little further, you probably find China. And the thing is, that is traditionally not what we associate with American democratic education. And though there's no question that we aren't living in those societies, there's no question that this isn't everywhere in the country. What I think many people in parts of the country are failing to understand is that for that group of people in those professions, in those states, they already feel like they're living through something worse than McCarthyism.
No. I think both of you also, I think, very wisely pointed out that this is sort of bleeding up into higher education too. So now we're even censoring the conversations that adults have with other adults, right? Like it's pretty unbelievable that this is the moment we're sort of getting into, that particularly in places like higher ed, where that's sort of the whole point, is having freedom of thought and exploring different opinions, options, and thinking. But I do want to give you both an opportunity. Like I think, Jonathan, you've done a lot of work on sort of the issue around kind of this claim that that the book bans are a hoax, and you guys have documented it very well. And then also Representative Eskamani, if you want to respond to also on the teacher shortage, and so those implications as well. But I'll turn it back to you guys on that. Jonathan, if you want to deal with the sort of hoax issue.
There's a lot of other I was just to add real quick, there's a lot of other externalities, to be aware of. And I think part of it is the teacher shortage. Florida has thousands of openings when it comes to teachers, and also anecdotally many friends and constituents who have left the field of education. And a part of it is because of the hyperpolarization, the fact that teachers are feeling threatened to teach, to identify, students that are diverse. And actually, Jonathan already alluded to this. It's just the notion that if I answer this student's question, I'll get in trouble, right? And so you're kind of putting teachers on eggshells every single day, who are already overworked, exhausted, don't make enough money to sustain themselves without getting another job. And it really is just so demoralizing. And again, these are professionals. These are folks that are college educated. They have an incredible level of experience. They're certified, teach in Florida. And yet they're in an environment where they're not valued and they're not supported. And so many of these policies, whether it is the book ban legislation, the don't say gay trans legislation, the just targeting of school board members. We have a union busting bill in Florida as well. And of course, just the a heavy hand of state government. I've never seen a Republican administration brag about, state control, right? I mean, usually these are the entities that want deregulation and they want local control, and they don't want to have a hand involved in everything. And yet it's been the opposite. We have a situation where a gay straight alliance organization, one of my high schools, after school, and wanted to host what would have been the third annual Donuts with the Drag Queen. And this is the third annual event. It's after school. It's with a drag queen. They have donuts, they talk, like it's super, like just casual and nothing fancy, nothing controversial, never was controversial before. And then of course, I got lifted up to state officials. They threatened to investigate the teacher and the school if this event went through, so they canceled it. And again, it's one of those examples of a hostile work environment for educators. And we had a teacher, as you noted already, who that showed a Disney film and went through all the parental permission, steps as well. And they're being investigated right now. So if you have a choice of what profession to go, especially in this economy where workers do have more choices, teachers are making an intentional decision to not stay. And that has consequences for generations to come. That is creating a gap in the workforce. It is going to hurt our institutional knowledge, which will then lead to students not getting a full rounded education. And it does set an uneven playing field in our ability to recruit and retain the best and brightest within the K-12 environment and the collegial environment. As I mentioned, these attacks don't stop with high school. We have seen them in Florida go into colleges as well.
I mean, I think we have to recognize that there is a media element here that has, grown up over the past 3 or 4 years, where people don't want to believe certain media sources, where people want to believe what someone is saying rather than, stories they might hear in their communities. But the evidence of the chilling effect, the stories about, libraries being, shut down, or pictures of classroom shelves with no books on them, a group of 4 students who was interviewed in Duval, Florida, talking about how they could not get more sophisticated books on their classroom shelves. And I love this. One of them said, well, they let us get, these books, but they're too junior for us because we're advanced readers. I mean, like, this isn't the what it would take to have made this as an elaborate conspiracy is so absurd, and to have it happening across so many different states. I'm heartened that things aren't worse, but the reality is that the responsibility here is to fight this at the root and to call out, the efforts to remove books themselves, the efforts to pass these laws, the passage of these laws, which are having these just obviously intended effects. When you have a law that you could have written 6 different ways and you refuse to change it, like the first, what's called the Don't Say Gay law in Florida, they had many opportunities and invitations to change that language, to sharpen it, to make it clearer about, is this about libraries, about classrooms, about exactly what is it about straight? Is it about LGBTQ? They didn't want to make the language clear. They wanted to keep it vague, and now it has had this incredible chilling effect because people say they don't know what the law really does or doesn't. And now that law is being expanded to 8th grade. And so, you're going to see this on a wider scale. And so, you have the same politicians who are clearly championing these laws and trumpeting the ways in which the laws are going to restrict certain topics, to then turn around and say, well, there's restrictions happening in schools. That's a hoax. I mean, it makes no sense. This is exactly what they wanted seemingly, to do in passing these laws. So if those laws are doing that, I don't know how it makes any sense to say that, things are being made up. Now, it's also true that this is having downstream effects in ways perhaps people didn't expect. I'm not sure that, if you look at, like, I was looking at this book that was removed. It's like a book of tribal communities and images around the world. And there's one community pictured a young child, and you can see their naked buttocks. And that book is being construed as like sexual or pornographic and has to be removed from schools, which is preposterous, right? Like, that we can still, there has to be a reasonable adult in the room who can differentiate between between how we apply rules around what is obscene materials and what is excuse me, and what is not. And so unfortunately that is getting blurred by a deliberate effort to blur that line to make people more nervous about it. And none of that is new, right? Like there have been fights about public schools and public libraries and, you know, nudity and bodies and whether we can teach people the names of their body parts for decades. So none of that is new. What's surprising, I think, for many of us is that after a period in which it was largely accepted that these were okay practices, that we would have professionals in schools teach about comprehensive sexual education, that we could name body parts, that we could talk about identities. Now there's just this effort to remove stuff, and it's having this, you know, much bigger effect than anybody really probably intended. And that's what happens when you scare people. It's what happened in McCarthyism. It's happening now.
Yeah. Well, on that point, one of the questions that we got in the chat is sort of around the power dynamics, and I'm curious what you all think is, you know, as we're bringing culture wars to the kids. So why is it that we're picking on kids and using them as a foil to have these fights? Is it because they don't have power? Is it because and then kind of a related question, I think, but would ask you guys to tackle is your point, Jonathan, that we have seen this before. So is this also a part of a bigger strategy to basically privatize schools? And so I guess first question is why are we targeting kids for the culture wars? And two, is there this bigger agenda around trying to privatize public schools and to eliminate them?
I mean, I would say yes, and right. I do think it's a combination of both. I mean, I made this point for a while that I feel like so much of the, you know, Moms for Liberty organization and their funding sources are tied to privatization. You know, I've had folks who have attended their conferences as observers, and of course, just reporting in the news as well. And there's a pretty heavy dialogue around privatization and creating almost like a la carte, you know, education type of services, which we also know is going to really be bad for students that come from low wealth families, like my family. When you don't have a parent that is driving you around, you know, from place to place to place. Like my parents believed in the power of education. And while I was at school, they were working multiple jobs to be able to make ends meet so that they could see a better life for their kids. And for kids like me, having good public schools are transformational. The ability to get on a school bus to get to a good school is important. And, you know, this type of push towards privatization is only designed to erode public education and perpetuate more religiously based education, which majority of those pushing for this are going to be emphasizing Christianity as the superior religion. But on top of all of that, you know, it also is going to reduce accountability. You know, these private schools in Florida have no accountability. They don't have to meet specific metrics the same level that our public schools do. The teachers don't have to be certified. And unfortunately, some have shut down, you know, with really no option for parents or students to seek reimbursements for the money that was spent, you know, on that school. And of course, there is a lot of just profit motivation here. I mean, there's plenty of lines to draw between, you know, political appointees and lawmakers who support vouchers to making money off vouchers. So there's a lot of problematic connections there too. But on the other side of this question around, you know, why the target on children, what's the impact on children? I do think that for those who wish to maintain the status quo, there's an understanding that change is inevitable, especially Generation Z, as a generation that has the most access to information, as a generation that is much more diverse than previous generations, and, you know, growing up in a time of serious political upheaval and concern, whether it's economic disparities and high inflation, whether it's gun violence, whether it's attacks on LGBTQ equality or attacks on abortion. You know, these are issues that if you look at polling around millennials and Gen Z, like a lot of support to maintain rights and freedoms and embrace different types of families and, you know, not maintain the same, you know, kind of rigid structures of the past. And if you know that change is coming, then you're going to put in resources, policies, and operations to stop the change. And I just saw some social media postings about Turning Point USA's latest conference focused on young women. And, the speakers in this conference were telling women not to dream big, that you have to choose between a career and a wife. And so, we're kind of seeing, what I would argue as an ideology that really is not designed to bring about equality or fairness or freedom, but one that's really designed to maintain an avenue of authority for men over women, and to again kind of go back to time on what these power structures historically in our country have been. So I think there is also an intentional effort. A phrase I like to use is how every culture war really is a class war, because when you think about it, when you erode public education, families who have resources will be able to afford a good, whether it's private school or perhaps a charter school. They'll be able to find the transportation, find the resources to cover the cost. But for other kids like my family, kids who maybe have different types of mental health challenges or trauma, kids that are kicked out of a private school because private schools have more flexibility to remove you than a public school does, we're going to be left behind, in institutions that will be underfunded, not well resourced, and again, not with educators that are top notch. And I do think that is the ultimate goal, is to further create division among classes and to maintain the power structure of those with means will be the most powerful compared to the ability for others to build economic mobility.
I think it's very clear that it's an effort to foment a moral panic around young people. I think it is clear that it grew on the heels of the panic or concerns that were quite valid about young people and the COVID-19 shutdowns around the country. I mean, any parent who had to deal with working a full-time job while having your children online schooled, became concerned about their children, as they should be, and the quality of public education they were receiving. That was largely not a successful experiment. The question is, do we, seek to blame one group of people or one profession over it? Do we after it's done, come together to work on better solutions to make up the learning gaps, or we somehow try to seek revenge on schools for this? And that's what strikes me as an element in a lot of this, is this almost like an element of wanting to revenge against schools, which obviously gets to their ability to actually make up those learning gaps. And those learning gaps are real. I mean, any teacher right now who has fourth graders can tell you it's those kids, didn't finish second grade or whatever that relationship is. And you start to, I think every parent also has a new appreciation for why each grade matters, right? How learning is supposed to be scaffolded. If you don't practice writing, I don't know, paragraphs for a year, you can't write a 5-page paper in the next school year the way that teacher expects you to. And so some of those, effects of this, the impacts of this on reading, on math, on writing, they are really being felt right now. And that's the issue we should be talking about in schools. How do we remedy that? How do we fix that? How do we adjust schooling so that we can accommodate students who came through this, very turbulent situation in different ways? Unfortunately, that's not what any school board is talking about right now. The school boards end up in these, long, deep discussions about, one word on one page in one book in their library. And it's not to say that we can't have a place for discussion of that, but a lot of this is taking up a great deal of energy right now that could be going into other things around schools and school boards. And so it is clearly an effort that's quite concerted to spread this kind of fear, to tell people, you see people challenging books in their schools that aren't actually in their school libraries. That happens time and again because it's not actually organic. This isn't a parent pulling a kid out of their kid's school bag. It's someone who found a book online and then goes to complain about it. And there have been news stories a little bit less now, but there were news stories originally about some of the people who were challenging books. I remember one in Florida where she said, why were you challenging these seven books or so in the school district? She said, well, she went to an online webinar with a group, and at the end they asked for a volunteer to challenge the books. And even though she has no kids in that school district, God called on her to challenge these books through, as provided to her by some organization. And so that's where this challenge is coming from, and that school district, has to be able to deal with that. So that's, there's coordination, there's planning, there's an effort to replicate, and there's this effort to kind of seize on fear. And it is unfortunately working. It's very easy to seize on fear. It's easy when, the easiest kind is to target parents' fears about their children. In that sense, this feels like, the 1950s redone all over again. And I'm sure it's happened in other times in American history as well. And so, that it is very clear that there is this, desire to replicate the past. And you see it when you watch like film clips of today versus film clips of people upset about books in school boards in the 1980s. They're saying almost the same thing. Sometimes, it's like the same Judy Blume book that they're complaining about. And, 30, 40 years later, of people reading that book, society hasn't necessarily fallen apart entirely. And so I think there is a need to recognize the way in which this is being orchestrated, but also, that the solution cannot be that we never have any conversation about any of these issues. The solution has to be a kind of coming together and a kind of just lowering the tone of this, to bring people who are willing to be reasonable and seek compromise into the same room together.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I definitely want to be mindful of both of your time, and I just so appreciate both of you, all the work you do, first of all, and then also for being here with us today. But one last question, and basically to give you kind of parting words, and to kind of leave on a positive note is, what are the things for our listeners and sort of the groups that are forming, and the kids and parents and teachers who are pushing back on this, what would be the one takeaway that you would give them, and to move forward? And also, I know that most of these fights certainly are taking place at sort of the local and state level, and then for those of us at the national level, do you have any advice? How can we be helpful to you, and is there something we should be doing nationally as well?
I mean, my first piece of advice is that you're not alone, right? That it might feel like, especially if you're in a very conservative county or district, if you're a teacher in a school district where you feel isolated, just please know you're not alone, that the majority of Americans and Floridians don't support this type of censorship, this type of banning. So please find comfort in that, and definitely reach out if you find yourself in a situation where you're looking for support. When it comes to, just actions to take, like, I think it's so important to share these stories, to elevate what's happening in your school, to contact your school board members, who sometimes can be a little less partisan than the state legislature. And then for national groups, continue to provide us with resources on the ground. Part of the challenge, I'll say, in Florida is just resources are so stretched, because while we're fighting this battle, we also are fighting many others. And so providing us with the on the ground information and expertise and data, helping to pitch stories to news reporters so that there's active investigative work happening and data-driven perspectives. I think all that's very important to empowering locals to at least have all the facts so they can make a decision for themselves. And I do want to say thank you for the opportunity to be here. And I just want to thank Jonathan from Penn America for all y'all's leadership. And, he emphasized the point for dialogue. And I love that, because I think we should be able to have healthy debate and dialogue, but that's not what this is. And again, I said this before, but I'll say it again: canceling someone else's speech because you don't like it or makes you personally uncomfortable is not free speech. And, if you're worried about your perspectives being canceled for whatever reason, then let's look at policies that support and respecting everyone's voices. Let's pursue forums, to have good debate and dialogue. Let's create that for students. But it's not okay to say that, your support of academic freedom is taking away someone else's freedom, or your support of free speech is taking away someone else's free speech. That's not how it works. So I think it's important for us to stress that.
And I'll just say quickly, you can go to pen.org/action, where we coordinate actions against book bans in different parts of the country. And everything Anna said, about getting involved, speaking out, sharing stories, particularly to the teachers out there who, or librarians who are experiencing this. We are always looking to collect firsthand stories, even if you want to tell us anonymously or help get a story into the press. My sense is that this is all happening at a much worse level than people have been willing to talk about publicly. And it's kind of like when after the Red Scare happened, people then were able to tell what had happened to them 5 years ago. I think that we're going to see a huge outpouring of this. And just in terms of, other levers of government, federal government, other state governments, I think that we are seeing a real hunger for proactive steps that people can take. And I would say that that's really positive. We have to remember the importance of the First Amendment. We have to remember students' rights to be educated in a non-discriminatory environment. And it's not sort of powerless when it comes to what happens in a school in Texas. It's not that like the people who live there are just sort of stuck with the school board now and they can teach whatever they want. We live in a democratic society. There are rules. We believe in equity, in equal rights in the United States. We still do anyways. And so I think we just have to remember that there are levers for upholding these things.
No, absolutely. Do you guys, for the audience, I know everyone should know that both of you are awesome and very active on Twitter. And so if people want to reach to, I would urge everyone to follow you both. But do you want to give your Twitter name for our audience?
For sure. I mean, we're the same on all platforms, including Instagram, Facebook, and you can and Twitter alongside Blue Sky and TikTok. And so it's just at Anna for Florida. I drop in the chat as well, but it's Anna with 2 N's, all spelled out at Anna for Florida.
And mine's at John Friedman. It's similar, same across different platforms. Thank you so much for having me. It was a great conversation.
Yeah, thank you both so much. And we really appreciate it. And thank you for everything you've taught us and all the great work you're doing. And for our audience, I just want to say thank you for being here to sort of kick off Children's Week. And for the rest of the week, First Focus and our community partners will be hosting a mixture of virtual conversations and in-person events on a range of topics. And we'll be posting online about those. And so and follow, use the hashtag this week, Children's Week 2023. But thank you all, and very much thank our guests for being here.
Thanks for having us. We'll talk soon.
All right, sounds good. Have a great afternoon, everybody.